Hey, it's author and attorney Kelly O'Connell, and happy 4th of July here with Knockout Radio. And how about this? Let's make a solemn vow that we will no longer sit back silently as haters trash our incredible history. You know how many unique and wonderful things have come out of America that were never done before? And all we hear about is how awful we were. Let's stand up against it. How do we do that? I've got an idea. Let's everybody listening within the sound of my voice on this show agree to do a little research every day and start standing up against the hateful leftists. And the reason that I say that we should do that is I think a lot of these people that are hating on America and going after us really don't even know the story, how we came up with free speech for the first time, and all of the other things, a constitution, a real constitution, so many different things that we came up with, the right to have counsel, the right to have an attorney. If you're being charged by the government, if you can't afford an attorney, you still get one. There's 100,000 wonderful things about this country. Are we perfect? No. But we need to stand up for this country or we're going to lose it. Now, weird news. I'm going to give you a little bit of weird news today. George Washington's teeth. I'm looking at a picture of him, and wow, they look weird. But you know what? He actually looks like he's got in there a... it looks... Well, I don't know what it's made out of. It's a piece of metal that holds the top and the bottom. They were not made out of wood, by the way. Now, George Washington's one of the most famous people in history, most famous Americans, and he did have problems with his teeth. He had lost all of his teeth. And so, as he grew older, his dental issues began to even change the shape of his face. So, they weren't made out of wood. The dentures were a combination of lead, brass, gold, ivory, wire, screws, and even the teeth of dead people. In one of his accounting books, it showed an entry where he was buying 9 teeth for 122 shillings. So the guy must have been in a lot of pain, and we're very lucky to have him. He really was an incredible person. A man of his time, but also a man of the future. All right, so I just want to... I've got an article that I've written in Canada Free Press that you should go and check out, but I want to put out one fact, which pretty much everybody knows, but the tinder keg, the thing that blew up the War of Revolution was taxes. And so there were a couple of different taxes that were enacted. It's because the British were actually, I think, losing money on the colonies here, and they had this international, this global, kingdom, an empire, and so they drew up different tax acts so they could make money from them. And here they are: the Sugar Act of 1764, strictly collected on molasses, very common import, and place taxes on other common goods such as sugar, silk, and wine. Okay? Then the Stamp Act, which is also very unpopular, 1765. This didn't have anything to do with stamps, but rather taxed every printed document used in the colonies, including licenses, newspapers, and flyers. If it was printed, it was taxed. And then the Townshend Acts, 1766, so one right after another, right? A series of acts put taxes on commonly used goods, including tea, paint, paper, lead, almost everything used in daily life. And so no taxation without representation was the call. And what did that have to do with? It had to do with the fact that the representation for America wasn't in the colonies, it was back in Britain. And so there was a fury there. As people became more and more sophisticated, and they ended up coming up with the rules that we live under right now. So they were very sophisticated because we're still abiding by their words, their rules. So the Boston Tea Party was a result of that. It was a precursor to the war. And because of the way that the British reacted to it, they sent military, they sent an army here to put us down. And because of a couple of different things, number one was poor leadership of the army over here, and number two, because of bad luck, the British ended up being in a very a very dangerous position for them, and they ended up finally just giving up, So it was started with taxes, but what was the purpose of the revolution? People were not happy with mad King George and an arrogant parliament. But what they really wanted and what they had earned the right to have was liberty, freedom. And because the Americans were so far, think about this, how far away we were from Britain, which was all the way across the ocean. So we had a lot more freedom to begin with. And when they started going after our private property and our money, which is more property, then we got upset and we fought back. There was the Declaration of Independence, which, if you read it, is a really brilliant document. And I'm going to look it up right now so I can read the beginning of it to you. And it's done in the way of the time that they were living in, the Enlightenment and the legal revolution that was going on of rights. But listen, just the beginning of this, and understand that this is a letter that's written to a partner, a person or a group of people that you've had a long-running relationship with. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to separation. Now just think about one thing here. We were so legally minded, we were so rights-oriented, that even when we were going to have a rebellion, we wrote up an explanation first. And it's almost unprecedented in human history. Now here's the next paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident, my friends, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this fact, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. Okay, stop that right there. That's the first two paragraphs, but that is a good 1/3 of this document, and it's considered by many people to be the greatest statement in the history of mankind, and it establishes such things as equality by creation and in front of God. And if you think about it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are rights. So, and that comes out of John Locke, but one of the things that John Locke said, which is really extraordinary, and if you think about it, has nothing to do with our government today. Why is government, I ask you, formed? What's the purpose of it? And John Locke writes, to increase men's freedom. So think about it that way. All right. So the primary goal of American Revolution was the preservation of liberty and life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is stated in other places by Locke as property, life, liberty, and property. So a good Englishman, a freeborn Englishman, didn't believe you could be happy or content or established if you didn't have your life, obviously, if you didn't have liberty to express your beliefs, and if you didn't have control over your property. If you didn't have those things, you were a slave of the state. So Bernard Bailyn, who was at Harvard, wrote a famous book called The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, and he won a Pulitzer Prize, amongst other things. And he said the founders exhibited a cluster of convictions focused on the effort to free the individual from the oppressive misuse of power from the tyranny of the state. All right, so bearing that in mind, what were the influences on the founders? First, England's unwritten constitution and legal history, including Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights that preceded our Bill of Rights, and a parliamentary style of government. Then, classical thinkers, which were introduced to the young in school in America, and we're talking about learning Latin and Greek grammar, reading historians Tacitus and Livy, Greek historians Herodotus and Thucydides, and translating the Latin poetry of Virgil and Horace. And so classical education stressed 7 liberal arts: the quadrivium, Latin, logic, rhetoric, and rhetoric has in itself the trivium, as well as arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. All right. We were also very influenced by the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment, the key figure in that was John Locke, who I've already mentioned. He's an empiricist, and so French philosophers like Rousseau influenced us, and Voltaire, British empiricists like Locke, and the Scottish Enlightenment thinkers such as Francis Hutcheson and David Hume. British Puritan revolutionary pamphlets influenced us, and Christianity was a foundational movement, a foundational idea, and the covenant taken from the Bible is the greatest political theory in history. So, Bailyn, I'm going to quote a little bit here, I'm going to sum up his ideas. He claims that Americans were already adjusted to greater levels of freedom than their continental British brethren, and so we were more likely to feel like our rights were being denied us than the average British person. We were a little paranoid to lose our rights. And so America put into the Constitution a separation of church and state because there was a fear in America that the misuse of the Anglican Church in England, which was used to torture a lot of beautiful, wonderful people, and to cause the great ejectment when all of the Puritan ministers were driven out of the pulpits over there, and then they ended up coming over here, some of them. They didn't want that to happen again, so that's how that got in there. Other issues was no standing army. Don't put your soldiers in somebody else's house. Third Amendment, I think. All right, so what writers affected us? Well, John Locke's Second Treatise of Civil Government, and John Milton, the great poet, Paradise Lost, wrote The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates, and these were deeply influential, especially the Second Treatise of Civil Government by John Locke, and then Cato's Letters, an English newspaper article series. They were brought over here. So all this stuff is being fought over and argued over in Europe, and then it's being brought over here, of course. So Balin calls the American Revolution both radical and revolutionary, of course, terming it the transforming libertarian radicalism of the American Revolution. And what does libertarianism focus on? Smaller government, more freedom for individuals, of course. So we wanted the right to stand up in front of Parliament and defend ourselves, but we couldn't. We were so far away and we didn't have representation. So how did we fight to establish our rights? The Constitution. And so Donald S. Lutz has a book that you can get for free, The Origins of American Constitutionalism, probably written about 40 years ago, 50 years ago. A beautiful book. And he talks about where the Constitution came from. Oh, by the way, Google that, The Origins of American Constitutionalism, off the internet. And Lutz is arguing the U.S. Constitution was neither inherited from the British or simply invented, but influenced by both. And so the Constitution was kind of a summary of American colonial charters and documents beginning 150 years prior to 1787, when the Constitution is put together. And so Lutz looked at the Mayflower Compact, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the Rhode Island Charter of 1663, the first state constitutions, the Declaration of Independence, and the Articles of Confederation. So the American constitutionalism largely comes from radical Protestant interpretations of Judeo-Christian concepts, first secularized into political agreements and incorporated into constitutions and bills of rights. A rich tradition and claiming aspects of English common law and English Whig history, and individual writers also put their stamp on it. Montesquieu, Spirit of the Laws, John Locke, Blackstone, and Hume. All right, so what were the founders' passions, and how are they being used today? Well, they wanted a general regime of liberty, a country of liberty. Patrick Henry saying, "Give me liberty or give me death," and they believed in it and they were willing to fight for it. A government B, that's A, generally liberty. B, principled government stands upon popular consent. The Declaration says governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So that seems like it's in our DNA, but it at one time was nowhere established. Now, the rule of law. Where did we get the rule of law idea from? Well, how about Rutherford's Lex Rex? And also from the British common law history, especially developed by Lord Coke, or is it Cook? Anyway, Lord Coke. And that is probably the most important fact in the history of our success, is a constitution that gives birth to the rule of law. Now, think about it from this perspective. A constitution is an example of the rule of law, because anything that goes against the Constitution is illegal, right? So we have a government in which we're all supposed to be under the same laws. Now, limited government, that's a libertarian idea, but the bigger your government, the more powerful it is, the weaker are the citizens and the less rights we have. Freedom of speech has to be established. You've got to have the ability to speak freely. We don't have that anymore, my friends. We're getting hit left and right because we're sharing the wrong ideas. Now, freedom of religion is foundational to America. You have to have an operating system, and I would argue that Christianity is that operating system, and then it gives birth to other things like the Constitution and so many other ideas. Capitalism. There's a contracts clause in the Constitution. No state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. Federalism and states' rights. Think about this. Where is all the power in the United States? Is it in the capital? There's a lot of power there. Is it in the state capitals? Yes, there's a lot of power there too. And in between, there's power. So we diffused power to protect us. We're doing all of this stuff to protect ourselves. Republicanism. What is republicanism? It is wide leadership through the diffusion of power through well-designed institutions. Give me an example. One institution, the Senate. The other one, the House of Representatives. A third institution, the presidency. Another institution. You can throw institutions in their Supreme Court, for example. Department of Justice. So you're diffusing power amongst all of these, and each one is making it safer. Although the institutions have been perverted by the present regime, and it's very sad. Separating power is the same idea. Each entity, institution has its own power, but it doesn't have the right to control other institutions. Property rights. If you can't own property, you're a slave. So, conclusion, let's celebrate our freedoms while they still exist. Don't forget the chief right, freedom of speech. Recall when Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo stated almost a century ago, this is the matrix, the indispensable condition of nearly every other form of freedom. And friends, we cannot run a healthy democracy without our freedoms. Each one is precious, and together they help guarantee liberty, prosperity, and happiness. All right, guys. Great hanging out with you. I don't want to make this too long. I understand that it is a holiday, but it's wonderful to hang out with you. And take this on. I'm going to do it myself. Take it on as a challenge. Every single day, read something that informs you more about our history, more about our laws, more about our Constitution, more about the heroes, the founders. And also read about socialism and Marxism and everything. Get ready to fight against these guys. We've got to do it. Have a wonderful evening. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. Ciao.